Sljedeći govornik je James Carafano, viši savjetnik predsjednika i E.W. Richardson Fellow pri Heritage Foundationu iz Sjedinjenih Američkih Država. Upoznali smo ga jučer kada je otvorio važna pitanja o odnosu Amerike, Europe i novog geopolitičkog poretka. Danas će govoriti o temi Hrvatski treći entitet u Bosni i Hercegovini, jamac stabilnosti. Čućemo američku i stratešku perspektivu na pitanje koje je za Hrvate u BiH i političko i egzistencijalno. Gospodine Carafano, izvolite.
Okay, so this is not going to be easy for me because I'm not going to talk about what I want to say. I don't speak for the U.S. government, but what I am going to try to do from my perspective is to try to describe where I think U.S. government policy is going in this region of the world. And I think that's very different because I think it's significantly different from the last administration. I think it's significantly different from what we've seen in previous administrations. And I think it represents an evolutionary change even from what we've seen in the first Trump administration. So what I'm about to say to you is what I think Washington wants. There are two reasons why the President of the United States, who is all over the world, all the time, doing everything, has the Balkans on his to-do list, in my opinion. One we discussed last night for those of you who are here is, I think the president's vision of how he secures America's place in the world is through really what we call connectivity. Whereas if we have these pathways where people can freely connect with one another, not only is that a great benefit to the United States, which is a global power with global responsibilities and global interests, but it eases the burden for all of us because we're all sharing in the responsibility of connecting with each other, and we're all vested in the security and the economic growth and the political discourse and diplomatic exchanges that have to happen to make that materialize. And we just saw a really great example of that in kind of the U.S. intervention in the South Caucasus with Armenia and Azerbaijan, something that no American president has done in ever really. Where the president helped broker the peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia, made an American investment in the middle corridor in connecting the South Caucasus and Central Asia to Western Europe. So we cannot achieve that vision, particularly for Europe, if there is a hole in the middle of Europe. So from here I'm going to Dubrovnik for the 3 Cs conference, which is, I think, the most exciting thing that has ever happened in Europe, except for Macron saying he promises he will never get involved in politics again. Maybe that's better, I don't know. But the idea of you're going to connect North, South, and Central Europe, unite this massive population, tremendous economic potential, which I think is really the future great engine of European growth. But you cannot do that without integrating this region into that infrastructure. We're never going to have a Europe that is whole, free, secure, and prosperous unless we build the backbone, the spine that's required to do that. And so I think for that reason, the president sees this as an important link in that project. The other reason is the president recognizes that the less conflict zones there are in the world, the less requirement the United States has in its own interest to deal with that. That's why the president proudly announces, I've ended 8 wars. Of course he likes credit for ending wars, and if they give him a Nobel Prize, he'll be thrilled, I guess. But there's a real reason. It's not just about hubris and pride. It's about every conflict that ends. That's one more set of opportunity. That's one less problem that we have to worry about. It's exactly the same reason that the president is so focused on crime in America. Because we have these cities with rampant crime and people aren't safe. And every time I step into a city and I get people and I shake people and say, bring public safety to your own people, and that happens, and that crime goes down in that state, that's one less problem for our country, one less tax strain, one less thing the president has to worry about, and he can focus on the positive things. So that's why he intervened in Venezuela the way he did. It's why he has been so forthcoming in being willing to enter joint conflicts and bring them to end. It's even why he's gone to Iran, which has been the chief meddler of conflict in that region, and risked America power and influence to end for all the squabbling that Iran drives in that region. And it is why this president has invested so much in trying to end the war against Ukraine. He didn't get elected to do that. Nobody's forcing him to do that. He has spent more time and more energy and more of his own personal political capital on trying to end that war and secure a free and prosperous and safe Ukraine for the future, and than any other foreign policy endeavor. And it's because he recognizes the importance of peace and prosperity in building a future. And so the last thing the United States wants to see is this region move in the wrong direction. So for those two reasons, the United States is vested and interested in the future of this region. So how does that operationalize? What does that mean? Well, I think a lot of this starts with the High Representative and the Dayton Accords. Now, I think it's well known that Heritage has written a lot of research that says maybe that the time of the High Representative is past, and we need to move on. I'm frankly, I don't think that's where the U.S. government is. I don't think the U.S. government is going to call for the abolishment of the High Representative. But having said that, and I think what is uniquely different about this administration is there is a rethink here on how do we get the role of the High Representative back to what it was originally intended, which is not to be the overlord of the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina and try to blindly drive the creation of some monolithic state, which is never going to happen. One, it's unrealistic, and two, that's not their mission. So they would absolutely love to see a rebalancing in the role of the High Representative to help implement the responsibilities that they actually have, and to play the role in helping the people find their future, not dictating the future, and creating a nation state, which is never going to happen. Having said that, this president, and Venezuela is a good example. Trump, famously said, I don't do nation building and I don't do regime change. And Venezuela is probably the penultimate example of that. The United States intervened in Venezuela because we had a vital interest to do that. This was a country run by an unlawfully elected criminal enterprise, which was damaging and deeply threatful to U.S. interests. And so, like cutting out a cancer, the administration went and they took that out, and then they told the government, said, look, as long as you're doing things that are not damaging to our interests, and you reflect a desire to actually serve your people, you figure out what your elections look like, what your governance looks like, but stop taking your oil revenue and using it to enrich a few elites and actually use it for the people, and stop doing things which are destabilizing in the region, and you guys will figure out your future, and we're fine with that. And we've actually seen that not only work in Venezuela, we've actually seen other nations in the region, which in many ways have been antithetical and combative with the U.S. on policies, including the regime in Colombia and Mexico, kind of shift their game as well. And so I don't think you're going to see the United States show up one day and say, okay, all right, this is what we're going to do. Okay, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. Any questions? I think the United States wants local solutions from local actors that the United States will come in and support and endorse. Azerbaijan and Armenia is a perfect example. I mean, I think if we were all super honest with each other, Azerbaijan and Armenia were more than ready to seal a peace deal, but they wanted to wait until Donald Trump came into office to do it. And the reason for that was they wanted the American president to endorse what they were doing. And the US was very willing to do that, because not only was it going to bring peace and security to the region, but they provided, because of their own incentive, because of their own innovation, a way to bring the US in as a constructive partner in that. I think that's the kind of solutions that the United States wants to see in this region. So I think the reality of that is there is no expectation that the future of Bosnia and Herzegovina is in some kind of homogenous state of Bosniaks. I just think we were speaking reality. That's not true. There are three peoples in Bosnia. They all deserve to be represented. Nobody is more sympathetic to that than the President of the United States. I don't know if you follow American politics. We recently had a situation in the US, we have a state of Virginia that wanted a referendum, and they wanted to reapportion the congressional seats in the state. So Virginia is what we call a purple state. It's kind of half Democrat, half Republican. And the reapportionment basically said, I think it was what, nine congressional seats, right? And now, right now it's split, what, 5-4, which kind of makes perfect sense, right? And the reapportionment would say, okay, the Democrats will get 8 seats, and the Republicans will get 1 seat. And there's actually one county in Virginia which is in like 8 of the 9 districts. And that county, because of the size of the population, would basically be deciding the congressional representation of the entire state of Virginia. Now, not shockingly, the president was completely opposed to this. And not just because it was an assault on Republican control of Congress, because it's just antithetical to humanity. I mean, as the cardinal so well said, is people deserve to live and to not have their identity erased and their voice erased, simply because they're of a different religion, they're of a different historical background and a different culture. So I think the United States has no expectation that the Dayton Accords are going to be some formula that we're going to blindly follow to a future that's never going to happen, where there's a state that is run by somebody to the detriment of everybody. And so I don't think it's looking for that kind of solution, and it would love solutions from the region that preclude that. The other thing I'll just say and here is, and I'm not saying anything that's everybody doesn't know, right? The great power brokers in this region are Serbia and Croatia. I mean, this is not shockingly shocking to anybody. The United States has a long-standing and very strong relationship with Croatia, and I think, if anything, the United States wants to deepen and grow that, because I think Croatia's place in Europe as a middling power and how that comports with what America would like to see in a strong, free, whole, peaceful, and prosperous Europe are increasingly congruent. So our partnership with Croatia is only going to grow. But I mean, this administration, I think, has been very clear. It would like to move forward with Serbia as a partner, and that is a sincere goal. We're very close to establishing a strategic dialogue between Serbia and the United States, and really kind of move to the next generation of kind of an open partnership. Not that we're going to agree on everything all the time on every issue. And this is one of the great things about Donald Trump, is he is just doggedly pragmatic. It's about, what can we deliver for people, and let's not get the absolutes of politics, in the way. So there's no expectation that there are not going to be no Chinese restaurants in Serbia anymore, or that nobody can, have Russian dressing on their salad. But the expectation is we're going to be honest with each other and build a real partnership. And they'll work on that. There's some issues they're going to get through. But clearly, and I think we all know this, there is no path forward for this region unless Croatia and Serbia share a common vision. And there's nothing the United States would be pleased to do more than to work with those two countries on something that's going to work for everybody. We've seen them do this time and time again. If you look, for example, in the Middle East today, The United States, through the Abraham Accords, has an incredible, far-reaching and powerful vision. The idea that Arabs and the Israeli state will work together and they will build a future that will put conflict in the past, because the region will be so integrated in its economic and its security and its political relationships that the extremists, the Iranians, outside powers cannot mess with that. I love the three legs of the stool, right? You cannot have a stool, right? And this is exactly what President Trump wants, to strengthen all the legs so it's more stable. So here you have in the Middle East, which is dependent in the future on, in particular, the Israeli-Saudi relationship, the Israeli-Turkish relationship, the Saudi-Turkish relationship, right? But those three countries, let's be honest, whether they publicly state it or not, they have to work together. We have to rebuild Gaza, we have to rebuild Lebanon, we have to rebuild Syria. Inshallah, maybe we'll have to rebuild Iran. That's not going to happen unless they come to an understanding about a joint and common future that they can all live with. This president is very comfortable in working in that. He thrives in that environment. He loves problems to solve. But when I say that is, he wants to be at the table, but he is not going to solve your problems for you. When he says, I don't do nation building, I don't do regime change, I'm not the world's policeman, I'm just here for America, that is a sincere and honest thought. But America is better off in a world where there is less conflict. America is better off in a world where everybody has their own seat at the table and where people can freely associate, and America can be part of that. And so I think there are a few regions of the world that have more exciting opportunities in the way future for this president than this region. But and I'll end on this, which is the energy has to come from the region. Armenia and Azerbaijan move forward not because Donald Trump beat them on the head and say you had to do this. They moved forward because they wanted to, and the president was willing to help. The Middle East is transforming in an unbelievable way. Not because the United States went in with aircraft carriers and said, we're going to bomb you until you guys get it, but because countries like Israel stood up for themselves, because the Gulf states are now standing up for themselves, and because they recognize that they have to work on a future together. And we see this with the United States in every other part of the world, while the Japanese are stepping forward in the partnership, while our partnership with other allies. The United States just signed a strategic partnership with Indonesia. Unthinkable in modern times. But why did the Indonesians do that? Because they saw the US as a partner. And so in so many cases, if you look where real progress is being made, it's not Donald Trump beating on the door. It is countries people beating on his door. So the US is primed to support a brave path forward in this part of the world that makes a place for everybody. And I am just praying to God that the leaders in this part of the world recognize the historic opportunity they have to create a future that brings something to this part of the world that it deserves more than anything, which is peace and prosperity and a place at the table that it's been denied for far too long. Thank you.